Hey there guys, how's it going? So, this upcoming heavyweight fight between Alexander Povetkin and Dillian Whyte has been made official. It's coming up in a couple of months. And yeah, I figured I'd do a video about the fight. I did actually get a couple of comments on a few previous videos. A couple of people did actually ask me to talk about this. But I was going to do it anyway because this is a fight that I think is worth talking about. But if I'm being perfectly honest, I think this prediction video is going to be a very quick one, probably one of my quickest, because I do have a pretty clear idea of how I think this fight will go, and I'm fairly confident and fairly certain of the outcome. I think that this fight is going to be a war of attrition, and I think that the winner of the fight is going to be Dillian Whyte. I think he's going to win the fight, and I think he's going to win the fight by stoppage in the later rounds, and I'll explain why. Now, Alexander Povetkin. Now, you guys know if you've been following my channel, I've been a long-time fan of Alexander Povetkin. In fact, I've followed his career from the very beginning, pretty much. You know, I've always been a big fan of him. In fact, during the Klitschko era, you know, back when the Klitschkos were on top, Alexander Povetkin was always my favorite, like, up-and-coming heavyweight. You know, my favorite contender back in the day. I was always a big fan of his. You know, watched many of his fights on the Sauerland card. You know, watched several of his fights live. And I was always a big fan of his, and I was always a big admirer of his as a fighter. And over the years, obviously he's been marred with controversy. You know, the whole situation with Deontay Wilder, and so on. And basically, I feel that in the latter part of his career, because of all that controversy and because of what was going on, a lot of opportunities that he would have had to really cement himself as a heavyweight champion were essentially taken away from him. I do believe in retrospect that he would have beaten Deontay Wilder back in 2016. I didn't think so at the time because I remember back then I thought that Povetkin was past his prime. But in retrospect, you know, after seeing how terrible a fighter Deontay Wilder was, I think that Povetkin had a great opportunity there, and I think he would have beaten him. But unfortunately, it's just been all downhill from that point on. I mean, ever since you know, getting messed around with the WBC and whatnot, you know, he had to take a lot of tough fights, fights which took a lot out of him, in my opinion. And when he finally got his opportunity against Anthony Joshua, it was just too little too late. I mean, you had the feeling going into that fight that if Povetkin had been just a couple of years younger and if he'd had a little bit more momentum, he might have been able to beat Anthony Joshua, but he just didn't have the stamina or the youth or the reflexes or the energy to really pull off a victory. And that really showed in that fight because he faded very quickly and he got knocked out in the 7th round. So in the later rounds of this fight against Dillian Whyte, who's obviously a lot younger, obviously a lot more motivated, and is going to be coming into the fight with a lot of ambition. You know, Dillian Whyte is on the verge of that WBC world title shot. He's officially the mandatory now. So Tyson Fury is going to have to fight him at some point, and if he doesn't, he'll get stripped. Dillian Whyte is not going to want to lose that opportunity now after all the work he's done. So this fight to me is going to be an attritional fight, and it's going to come down to stamina. And I think at this stage of Povetkin's career, he doesn't have the stamina to beat Dillian Whyte. If you guys want to see a couple of fights to sort of compare the style matchup here, I'd recommend you look at some of Povetkin's older fights. Like check out, for example, his fight with Eddie Chambers and his fight with his fight with Marco Huck. And the reason why I bring those fights up is because Eddie Chambers and Marco Huck were two fighters who, in some ways, were somewhat similar to Dillian Whyte in terms of their dimensions, and a few of their attributes were quite similar too. And in those two fights, you'll notice what won Povetkin those fights, you know, which got him out of trouble, was his work rate, you know, his stamina, because he had a lot of problems with Eddie Chambers, you know, who was a shorter, stocky, you know, more compact type heavyweight, you know, a guy who needs to get you toe to toe to do damage, you know, a guy who was smaller and, you know, kind of a cruiserweight sized heavyweight with good hand speed, but also really rough when he wanted to be. And he gave Povetkin a lot of problems. However, Povetkin's superior athleticism was what won in that fight because he completely outworked and outlanded Eddie Chambers. And in the Marco Huck fight, again, Marco Huck's another one of these smaller, you know, cruiserweight framed guys who was a similar sort of size and a similar sort of stature to Povetkin. and he used roughhouse tactics. You know, he got on the inside, he roughed Povetkin up, gave him all kinds of problems. I've got that fight on my channel if you want to check it out, and that was a great fight. But what kept Povetkin going in that fight was just sheer will and sheer determination, and the fact that he, of course, back then had pretty good stamina. And yeah, he was able to just hang in there and just work away, and he was able to win a decision in that fight. But back then, Povetkin was a lot younger, a lot more motivated, a lot more hungry, and didn't have the miles on the clock that he has now. And if he finds himself in that sort of position against Dillian Whyte, where he's getting the pressure put on him early, because Dillian Whyte, again, he's kind of similar to a guy like Marco Huck. You know, he can get inside and rough you up and hit you behind the head, and hold you with one hand and hit you with the other, push you around, hit you low, and just hit you on the break and stuff like that. Dillian Whyte will hit you anywhere, and he'll hit you wherever and whenever he wants. He's not a guy who's overly fussed about keeping it fundamental and keeping it fair. He's a very rough house and very rough, tough type of fighter. And I think that at this stage of Povetkin's career, Dillian Whyte is going to take him out. I really do. I think he's going to break him down. I give Povetkin a puncher's chance in the first 4 rounds. Or, if I'm being generous, the first 5 rounds. But if this fight goes past 4 or 5 rounds, I don't think Povetkin has a chance. And I think Dillian Whyte will take him out, and take him out attritionally. I think he'll do the same thing to Povetkin as what he did to Derek Chisora in the rematch. He'll just outlast him. He'll have more energy and more youth that will carry him to victory, in my opinion. So that's how I see this fight. I think Dillian Whyte stops Povetkin, and I think he stops Povetkin late. It's a shame because, again, I'm a big fan of Povetkin. He's a fighter who I've always admired, despite the fact that the boxing media seems to hate the guy. There's something very counterculture about about these Russians, man. And he's always been he's a fighter that I'm very nostalgic about, and I hope he pulls it off, but I can't see it happening. I think that Dillian Whyte is on the verge of the title shot. Dillian Whyte is on a mission to win that title, and I think he's going to stop Alexander Povetkin. So that's how I see this fight. Let me know what you guys think. Thanks for watching, and God bless.